Hello, everyone. Welcome in. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rico Borrego,
I am your other co-host, Tony Borrego.
and this is our podcast called Relatively Sound. Now, if this is your first show, welcome in. This is also our first episode. So, really quick, we just want to tell you guys a little bit about us and about what our podcast is going to be about. As you might have noticed, me and Tony, we are brothers. We grew up in Washington State. And even though I now live in California, he still lives in Washington. We stay in touch. And one of the things that we communicate about when we, talk with one another is music, because we both grew up loving music and we also both grew up playing music. Would you like to kind of give them a background of our musical history?
Yeah, so I remember that Rico took a guitar class, and he started, learning songs he liked on acoustic guitar and singing them. And then I thought that was super cool. I went my own route though. I saw Flea, and I wanted to play bass then after that. And then Rico and I both kind of became multi-instrumentalists and learn songs together, do covers, and just have a lot of fun.
And, as we grew up, we kind of got into similar bands and we also listened, to different bands and we kind of, went slightly different musical directions. But, over the years, one of our biggest bonds is talking about music because, we both love listening to it. We both love playing it. And, it's kind of like a brother thing where it's like, we like to kind of discuss things that we know we're going to kind of disagree with. And it's kind of like fun banter back and forth. So, our goal of this podcast is to really just talk about different musical things that pique our interest, and just, to kind of share our opinions about certain subjects, whether it's going to be about specific songs, specific albums, specific bands. We're going to have a certain topic for each episode, and we're going to kind of just focus in on that topic, whether it's something very broad, whether it's, talking about specific genres or talking about, something about like a live show or albums, our favorite way to listen to music, songwriting. And then we're going to do very specific episodes where we just talk about one album for the whole episode, or, we rank our favorite album openers by a certain band, and, our least favorite and favorite covers, and just stuff like that. So it's going to just be, from weekly different topics. We're just going to discuss different things based all around music. Occasionally we will, shamelessly promote our own music. Tony, you actually had an album come out this year. I don't know if you want to give a brief plug-in about it.
Yes, I released my first solo album called Good Cause. I couldn't have done it without Rico and some friends' support. I had my friend Bryce do drums for it and help me revise the songs. It's up on Spotify, YouTube, all the big platforms. If you want, check it out.
And then Tony and I are working on our own album together because, since we were both teenagers, we've been, creating music together. We both play a lot of the same instruments. And now finally, after like, almost a decade of writing songs, we finally started to perfect some of them. And we, earlier this year, we got together and recorded some basic tracks, and we're shaping that album out. So probably, hopefully sometime next year, we will be releasing that album. And probably along the way, I'll be releasing songs. If you really want to look up some of my music, Rigo Borrego on SoundCloud, you'll find some of my own songs there. But we hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. We're going to hopefully be trying to release an episode per week. And we definitely, will enjoy any comments you guys want to leave us, suggestions for future episodes, and anything else that you want to hear. Leave them in the comments. This will be hopefully going up on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, pretty much anywhere you go to listen to podcasts. So, you want to support us, just leave us a comment, and we hope you guys enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome in. I am one of your co-hosts, Rico Borrego.
I am the other co-host, Tony Borrego.
And this is Relatively Sound, podcast about anything music related. Today's episode, we are starting, it's going to be a kind of a monthly series that right now we're going to call it album for album. And the concept of this type of episode is beginning of the month, Tony's going to recommend me an album, and I'm going to recommend him an album that we both enjoy that the other one has never heard before. We're going to give each other a week to give it as many listens as we want, minimum of 3 listens. And then at the end of the week, we're going to record an episode, one for each album. And we're going to talk about the experience we had with that album. We'll give a little background to it. The person who's never heard the album will give their thoughts. And, the other one who has already heard the album can also give their thoughts. And it's just going to be an open discussion about an album that we think the other one should listen to for any reasons. So this last week, I gave Tony The Tragically Hip's third studio album, Fully Completely. And he gave me Tom Waits' album, Small Change. Now, in this episode, we're going to cover Fully Completely and Tony's thoughts about it. And in next week's episode, we are going to give it all up to my experience with Tom Waits' Small Change. So if you guys want to listen to Small Change, if you're not familiar with it, you can be prepared for next week's episode. And if you've not heard Fully Completely, I would recommend giving it a quick listen before finishing this episode, just because it'll give you some more insight into what we're talking about. But yeah, Fully Completely. It's the album I gave you.
Why did you give me that album?
It's a good question. Tragically Hip over the last 5 years have become one of my favorite bands. Fortunately, it took me until lead singer Gord Downey's unfortunate death for me to get into the band. I kept hearing their names in headlines, when he passed away, about, Canadians band, just lost their lead singer. And I was like, I've never really heard of these guys. I'm like, when I think of Canadians band, I think of like Rush, or I think about, some of the more old school singer-songwriters like Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Gordon Lightfoot, but I had never heard anything. In the US, the Tragically Hip are like kind of a relatively unknown band. And, I got into them and they quickly became one of my favorite bands. And I've kind of over the years have, sent you a song or two of them, but I don't think you really sat down and listened to, a majority of their catalog, their discography. And I just figured, for this first week for our episodes, I was like, I'm going to give you a song from one of my favorite bands. And I went with Fully Completely because it's kind of, if you're talking about getting into the hip, it's kind of the album most people would recommend someone else. It's their third album. It's kind of where they blew up even more in Canada. They had a ton of big hits from this album in Canada. And it's just it's like where they kind of really started to hone in on who they were as a band. Gord Downey really took stride in his lyrics and vocals. And, it's funny enough, this is not probably my favorite hip album. It's hard to even say if it's top 3, because I have 2 other albums from them that I think I just like a little bit more, but it's definitely a top 5 album for me from them, maybe a top 3.
Well, how many albums do they have? I don't really have a reference on that.
Oh, man. Off the top of my head, I believe they have 12 studio album, 13. I just looked it up. 13. I am prepared for this episode. Um, yeah, they have 13 albums. The first one was, I do know, Up to Here, their first studio album, was released in 89. So it's like they're known as like a 90s band, but they like, obviously they're from Canada, and Canada grunge movement in the 90s was slightly different than the US. So, um, they it's their third album, and I think it is the album where they really kind of started releasing classic stuff, stuff today that still feels very timeless. So again, not my favorite of theirs, but I think it's the easiest one for people to get into. I kind of thought you would appreciate it, even if not for the songs, but the production. And although I think down the road, if you like them enough, I'll recommend you different albums, probably their next album, Day for Night, and then the one after that, Trouble at the Hen House. I do think this was like the good jumping off point. So you had a week to listen to it. How many times do you think you listened to it? And what were your first overall reactions to it?
Well, let me preface this by saying that the only other time I've heard of the Hip, other than from you, is I saw Samurai Guitarist mention it on a video. And this was after Gord is his name, right?
Yeah, Gord Downey.
Yeah, this is after his passing that I saw it in a video. But the songs that I do know, or I did know previously, were from you. And I did like those songs. I guess I didn't really pursue them further. So when I listened to this album, I didn't really exactly know what to expect, just because I don't really know the band. And I ended up listening to it at least 10 times. Like at work, in my car, at home, just to really try to digest it. And sorry to keep you guys all on your toes. I'm going to come out and say it. I really enjoyed the album. I like it a lot. And I think it's, like you were saying, I think it's pretty accessible too, which I think always helps. And as I listened, kind of over and over, I actually started to appreciate the songs more. I didn't really grow tired of them quickly. Yeah, that's kind of like the overall. I did really enjoy it, and I'm glad you recommended me it. So thank you.
So when you first heard it, like, I don't know if you can, go back to the first day you heard it. When it ended, were you like, yeah, I see why you recommended it, this is pretty good? Or were you kind of a little bit more lukewarm? Because I kind of thought with this band, they're maybe not as flashy as some of the other bands that you listen to. So I was a little worried that you were going to find this a little too plain, because the Hip, they're very, their roots are they started off as kind of a blues rock band, kind of had like a Rolling Stones kind of vibe. But by this album is kind of where they started to like get rid of the blues a little bit, kind of become a little bit more just like, just a full rock sound. And my worry was that you were just going to find it just a little basic, especially because this album, I do think, unlike some of the albums after this, it's not as experimental. And like I said, it's not flashy, but it's just super solid for what it is. So, when you first finished the first listen, did any of it blow you away, or were you kind of like not sure?
So when I first started listening to it, I heard the first song, Courage, for whoever this Hugh guy is. I first thought, why the hell does Rico like this album? It seems like something that's very unappealing to you. Because to me, as I was listening, especially the first half, I was like, these are a bunch of classic rock songs, and I guess they are kind of done with a simple approach, which I'm fine with. I love a lot of bands like the early Police records are a great example of 3 people pretty much just, here's the bass part, here's the guitar part. It's, it's them jamming, it's them playing. And so I can really appreciate this on an album, especially because the songwriting, is strong enough to match. And as I made my way through, there was a couple things I noticed. One thing is actually a lot of these songs reminded me bit bits and pieces of them reminded me of other songs I knew, which I know some people might, be like, oh, it's a ripoff, but I actually really kind of like it because to me, it's kind of like a nod, to, the artists that they liked and grew up listening to. The other thing I kind of realized after probably like my first two listens, I realized actually that they kind of remind me of you a little bit. How you approach guitar, which I actually like once I kind of made that realization and it kind of clicked, I actually really had a lot of fun listening because it reminded me of, of like playing with you and stuff.
Which is weird because I like, growing up, like I said, this band was not in our CD collection. We didn't, it wasn't until after I moved out to California and, after Gore's passing where I got into them. So that is a little funny that, I mean, their guitar sound and stuff, Rob Baker, the way he plays, Paul Langlois, their style, I think, is, especially Paul Langlois, his rhythm thing is what he's got going on is just, it always fits the song so well. And, it's kind of like, I guess like a Pearl Jam thing where, you got two guitarists. It's like, there's two of you. One needs to be, kind of keeping the rhythm and, keeping kind of the beat of the song down, but the other one needs to like be doing something kind of interesting. And I feel like with this band and Pearl Jam, and I definitely can see a comparison to those two bands, that's kind of the music I grew up on. So yeah, I guess it doesn't surprise me that you think it kind of reminds you of my playing. And I definitely do not have the chops of either Paul Langlois or Paul Rob Baker. I mean, sorry. But I can see where you're coming from. On first listen. Oh yeah, go ahead.
For example, we can revisit this song too later, but for like Fully Completely, the title track, the solo, the way he approaches the solo is how I think you approach solos. It's kind of broken down into kind of small ideas strung together. And it's not the flashiest playing by any means, but I think that actually really fit the songs. It didn't really feel like he was overplaying. It just felt like he was, he had some ideas and he laid them out. And I think that's kind of how you approach a solo, I would say.
That makes sense. I definitely prefer solos that kind of have a more thought out, like approach to it. Like there's the solos where it's just like, someone's going crazy on it and it's just a lot of, improvs and, and stuff like that. But I really enjoy a solo where it's like they had an idea and they, kind of flesh out the idea as the solo goes on. They kind of repeat certain little guitar licks and stuff, and they build upon that. And Rob Baker, I think is really, because the Hip is not a band where like every song has to have a solo, but whenever there is a solo, I feel like they're pretty memorable. There's not a lot of solos where I think it's just him, soloing for like 3 minutes, noodling. It's because the guitar noodling I'm not the biggest fan of, but I do think in this band the guitar solos are always great. But on first listen, what were the songs that stood out to you on most? And I'm not talking about like your 10th listen or how you would listen to it now, but like what were the songs, the 2 or 3 songs where you were like, I like these songs a lot from just the first listen?
Okay, so the first song that really that I really got into was Lionized, which I think to me, I thought it was a pretty obvious one that someone could like first listen. It has a nice, I'm assuming a drop D riff, which is always fun.
One of the few, they don't have many of those, but yes, that is one of the few.
Wasn't there a song of theirs that had like an open tuning? Was it
Yeah,
Bob Cajun, or am I
Bob
way
Cajun.
wrong with that?
No, yeah, Bob Cajun from their album Phantom Power, one of their bigger hits in Canada. Yeah, that one is in an open tuning, and Ahead by Century has a different tuning too. I think it's some type of open tuning, but
and those are the 2 songs I knew from the band, of course, before listening to this.
But yeah, I for sure I know Lion Eyes is in drop D or something. I remember reading that in the liner notes the other day.
And yeah, it's kind of more rock. I love the backup vocals, really engaging. There's also the whole part where he says "cold wind blowing on your private parts." Now, is this part of the lyrical genius you've been hyping up here?
Yeah, well, I will say, fully completely, their first two albums, they mostly it was Gord writing the lyrics, but some of the other band members, Paul and their bass player, Gord Sinclair, yes, there's two guys in this band named Gord.
Wow.
They would write some of the music and some of the lyrics, but then when it came to this album, Gord kind of was like, "Hey, are you guys okay if I just, you know, do all the lyrics and you guys just do the music?" Not so much to like trying to separate the like, him from them, but just like he really wanted to give the lyrics his all, meaning if he was going to come up with stories, if he was going to take inspiration from history or geological references, that's what he was going to do. And this album does have some great lyrics from him and some very interesting lyrics. That is definitely one of the interesting lyrics where it kind of catches you off guard on first listen, but there's kind of reasonings behind those lyrics when you dive into the song more.
Because it's about a lion in nature on a cold, windy day, right?
Not exactly,
Ah,
but so that was one of them. What were your other favorites?
um, so another one was Fully Completely, the title track. And to me, not okay, this one to me kind of sounded like a Cure song, but in a really good way, and maybe a little more ramped up, a little heavier. But even from the snare sound, it has that squishy kind of like 80s snare. But I really did like it. I liked the intensity. It had a really cool like ending section as well. And I think the one other one that really caught my attention was The Wherewithal. And I think you probably know why if you've heard the song. The epic intro.
Yes,
Um,
definitely one of their harder intros on any of their songs.
so I guess it turns out I probably like the heaviest songs the most, which isn't because I favor heavy music in particular, but I guess I just thought they were the most interesting off first listen.
And then did any of the other songs grow on you? Were there any ones that by your fifth, sixth, or even 10th listen that you were kind of, warming up to any?
Yes, so there was a few that I definitely did not dislike, and I expected me to like them more once I listened to them, which was very true. One of the ones that I wasn't super into at first was Pigeon Camera. I
See,
guess I just felt what
that's so interesting because I swore that was going to be one of the ones you liked on first listen.
now it is one of my favorites from the album. I fully admit that, but at first I don't know if I just thought it was a little bit plain or whatever. But now I just can't stop getting Gord's raspy whine out of my ear. Too catchy.
So that one was a grower, and then any of the other ones grow?
Um yeah, so some songs like Wheat Kings I thought was pretty, but now it's like a lot more catchy to me as well. It kind of has that like sing along vibe to it. And I'm gonna take a guess. That's one that you really like off the album.
You know what? I really love it for a lot of reasons. When I was first getting into them, that was one that kind of intrigued me more because it's going listening to their discography now. They don't actually have a ton of songs where it's just like really pretty, gentle guitar. They definitely have a group of songs like that, but they don't have as many as you would think. Like they have like those songs like Bob Cage and that one. A lot of songs off We Are the Same kind of have that acoustic feel, but yeah, on first listen, when I was going through their albums and songs, that one really caught me. Now I don't, and it was one of their bigger songs in Canada, mostly because of the story. And I guess I'll get into some of it now. We Kings, although it was never a single, it was a really big song for the band because lyrically, Gord is singing about an actual incident that happened in Canada where this guy was accused for an awful crime of killing this young lady. and they thought they found the culprit. They thought they found the guy, and they locked him up, and he was in jail for a long time. And then they finally found new evidence that was like, nope, that's not our guy. And it was someone else. And it was a huge news story when it happened in Canada. And I mean, Gord is just literally singing about this, what happened, not only singing about, you know, this guy being wrongfully imprisoned, but then singing about like, Canada's reaction, and everyone was, clinging to their TV sets and stuff because they were just like, how could we let this happen as a nation? And I love it for the storytelling aspect of it. But musically, it doesn't actually do a lot for me. I wouldn't say it's one of my least favorites, but because I do think it's such an important song. But yeah, it's and I love the chorus. I love the lyrics. Let's see what tomorrow brings, but that's not actually one of the ones I go back to as much. So yeah, it's kind of me being surprised you didn't like Pigeon Camera. I'm sure you're a little surprised that Wheat Kings is not one of my favorites.
A little bit, especially because well, let me make a quick comment on the topic of that song. Now that you tell me the story, I do want to listen back because it's kind of more of a happy sounding song musically, but some of the lines from the song now have a different meaning. The part I think of right off the bat is he says something roughly like, nobody's interested in something you didn't do.
Yeah,
Which
exactly.
is pretty telling now. But I will say though, even though I only would probably listen to this song when I'm listening to the album, it does have the same bridge from my self-titled, or not self-titled album, my album Good Cause, the song Bike. It has the same bridge. So I have a little bit of a soft spot for it.
You mean it just has like the same chord progression?
Yeah, it has the same chord progression and the same voicing too.
I will definitely go back. It's been a little bit since
guitar kicks in.
Okay, it's been a little bit since I've heard your song Bike, and I'm very interested because like that's a good example. Like the bridge of Wheat Kings is not something I think of, where I think of like the bridge to some of the other songs more, the solos or the intros or outros. So that is very interesting. I do want to go back and listen to that now. But going back, I want to take a quick minute to talk about the opener. You were like, when you first heard it, you were a little surprised that I liked it, a little surprised that I recommended it. Give you a little bit of background on that song. You're like, it's called Courage, and it has, the little, parenthetical for Hugh McLennan. And Hugh McLennan, he was an author that Gord especially found interesting. And, he wrote about, he kind of wrote about like life, and he had a lot of, books that were, made you kind of question, ethics and things like that. And Gord actually wrote a couple of songs kind of based off his books. But funny enough, the lyrics that come right after I want to say the bridge, well, the song kind of slows down before it goes back into the last chorus, where it just ends with the chorus. He's literally quoting one of Hugh's books, like word for word. The whole line about it's a human necessity, living with the consequence. That whole thing is like, it's a little paraphrase, but it's like directly from one of his books.
Okay, wow.
But like the rest of the songs, the beginning, washed a band through a bunch of dancers, that's just based off like up to that point, the band's touring life, a lot of it was the song. Actually, it was funny when they were recording the album, they took a little break. And when they were taking this break, it gave them time to write a couple more songs. And this was one of the songs they wrote. So originally this was like not supposed to be on the album, but they kind of wrote it for a break in between writing the album. And this actually ended up being one of their bigger songs in Canada. It was released as the first single. It hit number 10, I want to say, on the Canadian music charts. and was one that they would play a lot of their live concerts. And I'm curious, has that song grown on you at all? Because it's actually one that I always liked from the get-go, just because I like, I don't know, it's like a very easy listening song, but it just has a nice beat to it. I love the bass line. I just like the guitar solo at the end. I love the singing melody. It's very catchy, but I don't feel like it's overly catchy. And that's one of my feelings about the Hip is so many of their songs are so catchy, but for like different reasons, and reasons that aren't because, it's like meant to be catchy. Like they're, it's like effortlessly catchy, which I like about it. So I'm curious, did that song grow on you at all?
Well, at first I want to agree. I think Gord's delivery is what makes it so catchy. For example, like on Pigeon Camera, that real like sort of like croaky voice he does on the chorus. There's something about that just hits so right, and it gets stuck in my head. But going back to Courage, a couple things. I swear I will answer your question. But when I first heard the song, I instantly thought of "L.A. Woman" from The Doors.
Yeah, which I
Are you
haven't heard
familiar with that one?
I've heard it before, but I haven't heard it in a while. I'll have to go back and listen to it.
Yeah, give it a listen later. The big difference is that Courage, it has more of a swung drum groove that kind of definitely sets it apart. Like I don't think it's a rip off. I'm not even sure if it's a nod, but I did hear that, and I do like The Doors, so that was a fun little moment, a fun way to begin the album. And I really do like that line he sings, "Courage couldn't have come at a worse time," or something close to that.
Which, really quick, it's funny, when he originally wrote that line, it was "Courage, my love," and it was going to be "Courage, my love. It doesn't come, it doesn't matter." And it's funny because in the reissue box set they just released earlier this month, they, in the liner notes, there's an interview from Gord where, it was supposed to be "Courage, my love," and he changed it because he thought it was a little too cliche. And actually, he said, looking back on it, he wished he would have wrote "My Love," because he said that it was like more of a brave thing. Would have been actually cooler to say it instead of not. So, but I agree with you. I really like that line, because courage does usually come at the worst. You never really have courage when you need it. Funny enough.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point right there. Um, Now I did like the song, and there's something that I kind of feel about the Hip based off this album that maybe doesn't translate, or maybe you won't feel the same way. I'll say that. Now, I do think that the Hip has a lot of influences, like I'm saying. Like I think on Wheat Kings, it kind of gives me Bruce vibes with like the storytelling over simple acoustic.
And by
But I
Bruce, you
think
mean Bruce Springsteen, right?
oh yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. The Springsteen.
Just
What
making
what's
sure.
his nickname? The Boss?
The Boss.
The Boss. Well, a lot of these more kind of like rock ones where they're not like as heavy or as dark as the title track, they remind me of if you took REM, but instead of them being college rock, they were classic rock.
And that's a fair point, because a lot of people, when they try to compare like Gord, especially as a singer and a lyricist, they pick Michael Stipe, lead singer REM, because the both those bands, and I would even include Pearl Jam a little bit. I feel like all three bands had a very similar, like they all three started off kind of with a specific sound. Pearl Jam grunge, REM college rock, and the Hip almost like blues rock. And then like 3 albums in, I feel like they changed their sound, and like Tragically Hip kind of became more normal rock. REM kind of started shifting their sound a little bit too, and they were kind of going mainstream, and not like in a sellout way. They just kind of were making, more ambitious choices with their music. And Pearl Jam started experimenting by like their third and fourth album for sure. But yeah, a lot of people think that Michael Stipe and Gord Downie were similar in just like the way they sang, even the way like their stage presence. Like they both get so into the music they're not even paying attention to what they're doing, and both kind of have really, specific lyrics. So That's a very fair comparison. A lot of people compare the two bands, and I'm one of those people. I think they're similar in a way.
And I don't know if this is true, like in sort of like a real life personality sort of way, but when I hear Gord and Stipe, I hear them sing and stuff. Their delivery makes me think that they take themselves rather seriously when it comes to music. And I don't mean that like a reflection of their own, character, but like when I hear their music, it makes me think that they're like pretty serious about it and passionate into it, which is something that, always draws me in.
Yeah, I mean, I think Michael Stipe kind of comes off, I think, to me a little bit more on that serious side. The more you get into the hips music, I think you'll find, you know, lyrics that are kind of, tongue in cheek and stuff. And there's a lot of, he has a lot of wit to him, especially when he goes into solo albums. There's just some tracks that are just like you almost bizarre lyrically, but yeah, they both definitely have an intensity where when they want it, they can seem really into the performance, into the song, and that's one of my favorite things about both singers.
Could we take a second to discuss Gord's wit? I have a few questions for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, in El Dorado, I mean, as witty as this is, what does he mean by Berlin makes him sexy?
That I don't know, and funny enough, if any listeners are listening who happen to be a hip fan who follow the Tragically Hip subreddit, I'm actually one of the moderators there, and of course, I'm going to be plugging this podcast when we finish this episode and we publish it. But I do this thing. I've taken a little break from it, but I try to weekly or bi-weekly, I do a song of the week, and we take a song from one of their albums or unreleased songs, and we do a deep dive. We discuss the lyrics, the music, and I did El Dorado probably a couple months ago, and it was one of those songs where, like, some of the lyrics make sense. Gord, in that same interview for the reissue box set that came out, he talked about that the line, he talks about the ticking, that line came from the fact that when he listened to the music, especially the drums, Johnny Faye, their drummer, was really had the steady beat that sounded like almost like a metronome, like a clicking, and that's where he got that line from. Kind of sounded like an alarm a clock or almost like a bomb ticking. Where the Berlin
Interesting.
where the Berlin line came from, or smells like coffee line, it's hard to say. I think El Dorado, I think, Man Size El Dorado to me sounds like he's talking about the car, but then El Dorado, if I recall from my research, was also like this lost city of gold. I'm hoping I'm getting that right. It's been a little bit since I've done the research on that song. So it's one of those songs where, like, I think he's singing about one thing, but the lyrics can easily be about the other thing. But yeah, that is one of those lines where it's like, I want to say too, in that interview, he said like he almost did the vocals and the lyrics in one take just because he said the lyrics just came to him really quick. So it's just one of those songs, I think, where it's like, what does it mean? It's a little hard to say, but it somehow it just fits, it fits the music, it fits the sound of the song.
Yeah, and I'm a sucker for that. I mean, like the whole ticking thing, I do love when lyrics reflect the music. But I think at the end of the day, if I were to listen to a song, I think I at least want the lyrics to just sound like they fit the song. And I think that this song being a little more of a fun one, that the kind of random sounding lines actually fit well. And another question, he must be really into his senses, because in another song he says that he wants his life to smell like something or something like that on Looking for a Place to Happen. And this bothered me because you and I were having a discussion on the new Chili Peppers album.
Yes, Unlimited Love.
Yes, and you had a problem that he said the smells of America.
Well, yeah, because in that song, the whole lyric is like, these are the ways when you come from America, the sights, the sounds, the smells. I don't know. It's just like him, and it's very Anthony Kiedis. So it's like I almost can't be mad at it. Like I should be expecting it at this point. But looking for a place to happen, it's if I recall lyrically, it's kind of about like early settlers and kind of discovering like land for the first time. And I think some of those lyrics reflect that. I think I want, my life to smell like that. Because I think that's the lyric that you're referencing.
Yes.
I think in that song, he's singing from a character who's, discovering something for the first time. And it is a weird line. And maybe just because I've heard the song so many times that, but like, I mean, the beginning, because it's the very beginning of the song. He's like, I got a job, I explore, I follow every little whiff. So it's like he's already talking about smelling stuff. Like, so I don't know. The Anthony Kiedis line, it just comes out of nowhere. But I don't know. I don't take as much issue with this line. But he's singing like he's trying to find a place. He sings ancient race. He's this is one of those songs where it does have like one of those deeper meanings where he's probably talking about colonialism, like in Canada in the early days. He even names, I can't remember, Jacques Cartier near the end of the song. So this is one of those kind of history songs where, like, both of us not being from Canada, it probably hurts us a little bit that we didn't grow up learning about, Canadian history. So
even though we're so close to it.
Yeah. But even growing watching, like I never heard the Hip on the radio. Never heard their name literally ever. So, it's just because they never made it big in the US, but in Canada, they're just like the royalty there. And I do think as an American listener, sometimes that'll hurt the song on our first couple listens because it's almost like you have to go and do some research. But
there's a lot of different topics he sings about throughout this album. So yeah, this one about colonizers, the which one was it? The Wheat Kings, about the whole murder thing.
Mm-hmm.
Locked in the trunk of a car. There's a song about hockey. Am I wrong about that?
No. Okay. So the one about hockey, you're talking about 50 Mission Cap.
The hair metal sounding one.
Yeah. And that song, I was curious if you'd like it because I'll just say this on record. This also isn't one of my favorites. But yet it's also one of their biggest songs in Canada, was the second single. Now, what I love about the song is the story behind it, because the song, if you listen to the verses, he sings specifically about this hockey player. He was on the Toronto Maple Leafs. His name was Bill Borelko. And it's literally him telling his like life story of how he helped the Maple Leafs win the Stanley Cup, right? Win it all in hockey. And then right after, he goes on a fishing trip, and he goes in a little airplane, and he never is seen again. He's lost for years and years, and they end up retiring his number, but then they finally discover his remains, and the year they discover his remains is the year that the Maple Leafs went on to win the Stanley Cup again.
Whoa.
So it's this very like just kind of eerie, like what a coincidence moments.
Goosebumps.
But the most strange part and the little humor you can get from this is that
he wrote the whole song from the back of a hockey card, right?
Yeah, like baseball cards sometimes, different sports, football cards, it has a little biography of the person. And Gord Downie, one day, he just found the card. He was opening a pack of hockey playing cards, because hockey is, the biggest sport in Canada. And he starts reading the back of the card, and he's like, wow, I've never heard about this story. Or their guitarist, Paul Ingwall, he was like, oh yeah, if you never heard the story, it's so interesting. So Gord went to his local library and found a book on him and started reading up on his history. And yeah, when the band came in with the song, Gord's just like, I'm literally just gonna like take what I read from this hockey card and put it in the song. And not only that, but in the song, I'm gonna be upfront about it and say, "Hi, I got this from the back of a hockey card." So again, that's kind of one of his like tongue in cheek moments where it's like yeah, I'll tell you where I got the inspiration from, because it's such a crazy. But then what he does is in the chorus, you start hearing about the title of the song, 50 Mission Cap, and that has its own background. Him and the band were visiting the big museum in Washington D.C. It's I'm drawing a blank.
The White House.
No, museum.
Oh,
I went to it too when I went to DC. I can't remember now, but the museum where there's a lot of historical things that you can learn about, and they at the museum he read about
the Smithsonian.
Yes, there you go. That's it.
Thank you, Google.
And he was reading about these caps called 50 mission caps that they were giving out in World War One. And it's like when you were a pilot, when you completed your 50th mission, you got this like little badge and this little cap. And for whatever reason, he just like found this very intriguing. And he literally went on to sing about this. And I think I misquoted it. It was World War II, not World War One. And
Okay.
he just was like, he liked the theme of putting that with the story of Bill Borello. And, I don't know if it's because, he went missing in his little airplane that he took when he went fishing or what, but, he just, he wanted to take two historical things that don't really connect and connect them together. So yeah, that's like the history of that song. And then, and locked in the trunk of a car, which is very literal, just based off that, title. This song it's not based on any particular historical moment, but it's pretty much about a serial killer. And the song starts off with like, they found armor in my belly. It's like first he's singing the perspective of a shark, where like they find this armor from a conquistador, and then he starts kind of going into the story of, he dumping the bodies and just him going on a killing spree. And at the end of the song, it kind of ends with him yelling, "Let me out." And he's singing the perspective of someone that's locked in the trunk of a car. And really quick, this song actually came from, so the band, especially in the early days when they played their live shows, they would like play like, okay, their first album, their biggest song was New Orleans is Sinking. And during the bridge of the song, the band would go into like a 5-minute jam. And during the jam, Gord would either start ranting to the crowd about anything, like whatever the first thought that came into his head, he would sometimes just start saying it out loud. And sometimes it'd be a story. And as the band is jamming, they're kind of ramping up the sound that's getting more intense. And then soon it would turn into him kind of singing. And soon he'd be singing like words to this song that he just came up with. And then the next couple of nights of the tour, he would kind of start working on that song, coming up with lyrics. He'd always have a journal with him, a little notebook where he'd write down phrases and lyrics that he liked. And then by the time the band would go in to record their next studio album, he had lyrics to these little jam sessions that they came up with during a live jam that they were doing in front of a crowd. And that's one of the songs he was singing lyrics during their song Highway Girl, where he was talking about dumping the bodies and a map carefully dotted, no one will spot him. And eventually those lyrics, 2 albums later, not even just like an album later, 2 albums later, boom, they were in this song. So that's just a little background on how the band kind of sometimes came up with their songs. Sometimes it was literally based off live jams during songs that they were performing from other albums.
You know, if I was at a Hip concert and they were jamming out on a song and they kind of did like a little actual jam section, and the singer starts talking about, putting bodies in his trunk, I think I'd be a little scared.
But
But
at that point, like once the band, because the band became very popular in Canada, even just off their first album, so they kind of knew Gore's personality. But I get what you're saying. It'd be weird if like there's certain bands where if the lead singer did that, you'd be like, what's going on? Like if the dude from AC/DC starts singing about that during the middle of Highway to Hell, you're like, yeah, this is weird.
you're like, that's not about alcohol.
Yeah. But yeah,
Um,
the song definitely does have a lot of elaborate and weird lyrical moments.
Now to get back into the actual overall songs. Now I'm not sure if this is gonna surprise you, but "Locked in the Trunk of a Car" is probably my least favorite from the album.
You know what? It doesn't surprise me only in the sense that on the first listen of this album, that was probably in my bottom two as well. And I'm going to guess, is it because the lead guitar riff, like the verse guitar riff work, is it just a little too almost like 80s corny sounding production?
I wouldn't necessarily pinpoint it to that. And by the way, the my joke about the lyrics don't bother me. Like that's not the thing. I think the lyrics are kind of cool actually, which kind of bums me out. But to me, yeah, the main part is just a little bit forgettable. It's not cliche to the point where I think it's like lazy or anything, but it just feels a little, yeah, kind of like you said, a little too cheesy with it.
See, I think over time, I think the song will grow on you because yeah, first listen, the only part I really like enjoyed was the end where he's yelling, "Let me out," just because the power
Right.
in his vocals are great. But the more I listened to the song, the more I understood why it was such a big song for the band. It was again another this song, Courage, at the 100th Meridian, and Wheat Kings were all very popular songs. Wheat King wasn't even a single. And then even some of the other songs on the album, like the title track was actually the last single from the album, but it wasn't even one of the bigger songs, but it was definitely one song they played like at every show. But "Locked in the Trunk of a Car" is like a fan favorite as well. And I think I understood it the more I listened to it. Like the first verse, he's singing very kind of almost calm, kind of like a serial killer. Like they can be calm. They're not like always really violent, aggressive. Sometimes they're like eerily calm. But then when they get into the second verse, he goes into his higher register where he's like, it's way more powerful singing. And I just think that helps kind of build the song, especially when you get to the end, when they go back into the intro music. That's when he starts doing the "Let Me Out." I just think, I don't know. It's a song that it's super catchy the more you listen to it. I was put off by like that kind of corny 80s kind of sound. And this was not recorded. I mean, this album was recorded in 91, 92, released in 92. But this is one of those songs where I swear like the music was a little like leftover from their first couple albums where it has a little bit of that 80s sound. So I do agree with you that it is kind of forgettable at first, but I think you'll grow into it where my least favorite on first listen was actually "The Wherewithal," which is why I'm not surprised you liked it because I can see why you would like it because it is a little harder. But I thought that intro, and I still kind of don't love that intro to "The Wherewithal." Like I like how powerful it is, but I also think it's a little corny, and I think it almost doesn't fit the album. Like the hardest song
But
on
it's
this
pretty
album,
short though.
well, it is short. It is the shortest song on the album, by a good stretch. But it's like I don't know. It's when I first heard that intro, I'm like, this doesn't even sound like the same album. It sounds like we're jumping into a whole different territory of music. Where like fully completely the title track, it's way heavier than I would say most of the album, but somehow it fits because it doesn't start off super like the ending of fully completely where they like the guitar kind of goes into like double time and he's doing his yelling and stuff. That's like really raw and powerful and rock and heavy. But it builds to that where the Wherewithal just starts off that way, but then when it goes into the verse and the chorus, it's kind of like tame. I don't know. It's something about that song, and it's weird because it's the song they ended a lot of their live concerts with. It was their closer.
I mean,
For
that kind of makes sense.
and they because they wanted to close a powerful song, and I get it. And there's a couple other songs too they close the shows with that you'll hear probably eventually, like "Fire in the Hole," where it's another similar song. Fire in the Hole is like a punk rock song, and I'm like, this was the song that you guys close your shows with. I don't know, and I like shows that close with a powerful song, but this one is just, I don't know. It's, if I'm looking at the set list, the album track list right now, I would probably say that Wherewithal is my least favorite.
It is a worse version of Lionized.
Well, Lionize, I really like because it rides kind of in that middle line of like, this is a rock song, but it kind of has like, it kind of pumps you up, but it doesn't get like as rocked out as Fully Completely or Locked in the Trunk of a Car or at the 100th Meridian, which I'm very curious. That's one of the few songs we haven't really mentioned yet. How did you feel about at the 100th Meridian?
Now, the whole time until you and I were chatting, not about the album necessarily, but I mentioned At the Heart of Meridian, which even after listening to it 10 times, I completely got the title wrong. Now, the intro, and I'm going to butcher this word, reminds me of that Steely Dan song, Bodhisattva. I don't know how to say that word. I'm sorry.
I've never heard that song before. I know very few Steely Dan songs, but...
Well, the intro kind of reminds me of that. So that one almost felt like a nod to me as well. But it once again, I just think it's kind of cool to hear that. So I was like, oh, okay, nice. I like that one. And I don't have much to say about it in the sense where, there wasn't anything that I felt either bothered by or something that like really grabbed my attention. But I will say I do like his delivery of how he sings it. I do think though, my one critique is I think as I listened to the album over and over again, that was one of the songs where it felt, not that I got old, but it kind of just felt a little repetitive.
I'll say that it was one of the songs where I liked a lot on first listen. And I can definitely see where you're coming from. It's the more you listen to it, it's like the lyrics. I actually really like a lot of lyrics in the song, but like, yeah, there's nothing about it that I think grips me as much on repeated listens as much as like the title track or El Dorado or Pigeon Camera or even Courage. But I don't know if you, because it's weird. The comparison I make to the song, and not a specific song comparison, but I think it sounds kind of like a Pearl Jam song in the sense that it kind of is like, and I don't even know from what Pearl Jam album, like maybe Versus, Vitology. Like it just kind of has like
Versus Vitology.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. It just reminds me, and maybe it's just a song that I think Pearl Jam can cover and pull off really well, but it's always just kind of remind me of a Pearl Jam song where it's like one of the Pearl Jam songs where it's like not super rock and heavy like the Wherewithal or Fully Completely, but a song that's like, I don't know, it just kind of has that groove. It has a really good groove, like with the bass and the drums and the, kind of guitar riff and the chordal pattern. Like it's very groovy, but it has that kind of rock sound. The guitar tones I think are great. And it's like kind of a simple rock song that still has enough content to it that makes it interesting and not just kind of like a filler track. But yeah,
I definitely
agree.
don't think it's filler.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those songs where, besides it being a big hit too in Canada, it was a live staple. Like they played at every show, because in the later years, they would they'd play the song, and when it got to the breakdown where the guitar solo is, right after he sings the great line, "Seems to me I still remember every single fucking thing I know." When it got
we're
to
an explicit podcast, okay?
Yeah. After that line in the live shows, they would increase the tempo. Like it would just go like, and not double time, but they would just, right after that line where you're expecting the guitar solo, they would just go boom really fast. And they would do like a 5-minute jam with this faster version. And then in even later live shows, when he gets to the part after the solo where he almost does like a rap, that kind of really fast spoken part, he would see them sing that twice as fast on the album version, to the point where he's like, his voice is ready to give out at the very last like couple words because he's like singing it so fast and he's like losing his breath. So it was definitely a fun song to see live. And unfortunately, I never got to see the band live because I only got into them after Gord passed away. And you know, that's unfortunate, but it's a song where if you like watch live concerts on YouTube and get bootlegs, it's a fun live song.
Okay, I'll definitely have to check that out because that does sound pretty awesome. And in that 5 minute jam session, is he also telling more murder stories or?
He would do other stuff. Like he would he had some gimmicks, and I don't mean gimmicks in a bad way, but like he would have some moments where he would especially in later performances where like throughout the whole show he'd be like having like a fight with the microphone stand. And sometimes he would knock it over but then catch it with his foot and you know make it swing back at him. And sometimes he would do those antics during that part in the show, or like, you know, because he sings like the lines, I remember Buffalo, I remember, and so sometimes he would start pointing at random people in the audience and go like, I remember you, your name was Kevin, I remember you, your name was Julie, and just making up stuff as he went along. So yeah,
That's great.
It was very fun. But I'm curious, and I might have told you this already, so you might already know the answer, but if you were to, what would you think is my favorite from this album?
Oh, if I had to guess your favorite, if I had to guess strategically, I would say your favorite would be Will Go To because we haven't talked about it yet. So that would have been the perfect opportunity to ask that question. But if I had to guess just based off which song I think you would like the most off of it, I would probably just guess Fully Completely because that one's kind of a monster of a song. Like I think not that like for it to be the best song on the album, it has to be like heavy and thoughtful and dynamic. That's not necessarily a requirement, but I just think it kind of checks all those boxes. And at least when I heard it, I was like, wow, that's a great song. So final answer, Fully Completely.
You would be correct. Fully Completely is my favorite. Yes. And without, I'm guessing I'm just spoiling now. It's as of today, and it does kind of change from time to time. It is my favorite Hip song. Although it's a very, like my top 3 or 4, I could almost pick any of them and make a case for it being my favorite. But yeah, Fully Completely is just like, it's the one song that I can listen to any moment, any time of day. And I just love it. I love the energy. I love the lyrics. I love the bass line that begins the song. Man, it gets me pumped up. I love the guitar solo at the end where it's like, goes into this like almost double time feel. I love the screaming. It's like a perfect song. And it's just the perfect length where it leaves me wanting, like, I want to just click repeat again because it just, such a powerful song. And like, it's one of those cases where it's like, this is the perfect title track, not only because I feel like title tracks do need to be kind of like a pivotal moment in the album.
Right.
And it's just a cool statement, like Fully Completely, like it's almost a phrase I've adopted into like my normal, conversational,
was it lexicon?
Language.
Is that the word?
Yeah. It's something that is just, I kind of say from time to time. And I will say though, Will Go To, the only reason I haven't talked about it yet, it's one of those songs where I call it like, it's like a perfect middle of the album song. Like it's if I remember correctly on the vinyl, it starts side 2 and it has a cool little riff. And, like you said, I think you mentioned earlier, it has great group vocals. Maybe you said that about Lion but Will Go To also has some great backing vocals.
Definitely was talking about Lion Eyes, but I agree with you too. Yeah,
and it's just, it's a fun song. It's like the song that every time I listen to it on the album, I always forget how good it is. Like, I appreciate it every time I hear it. And honestly, I might go to that one more than something like Wheat Kings or definitely The Wherewithal, just because I think it's got more interesting, elements to it. That said, I definitely don't call it, and I don't dislike any of the, even the Wherewithal being my least favorite. I still really like that song and enjoy it a lot. But Will Go To, and both Will Go To and Lion Eyes are kind of like album tracks to me, where they're not like, they don't have the lyrical importance of 50 Mission Cap or Locked in the Trunk of a Car or Courage, but they're just really solid album tracks. And I'll say Pigeon Camera is kind of the same, but Pigeon Camera, that's the song that's grown on me the most. And every time I hear the song, I almost want to rank it a little higher than I probably, would at, if I was to sit down and rank the album. It probably is not in my top 5, but I would really like to put it in there because every time I hear it, the one thing we haven't talked about, and I want to ask you here is, what did you think of the production of the album? Because I think Pigeon Camera is a perfect, like, you listen to it and like everything is just so crisp and like clear and like clean, even when like some of the songs have like distorted tones on the guitars. Like, I don't know. And that's one of the reasons I picked this album, because I know you're really into production and I am too. And I just feel like this
I'm
album,
trying to get in production.
yeah. And
It's a
like
new thing for me.
Yeah. And me too. Like you do your own self-production on your songs, and, you're going to be doing production on our songs, and hell, I think you're going to be probably editing this podcast, cleaning it up, the audio. But I think this album has great production. The producer of this album, I think, did a great job. I can't pronounce his last name. I'm just calling him Chris T. He did actually, unfortunately, pass away in 2018. But he was known for producing. He produced heavy metal artists like Thin Lizzy and Judas Priest.
So he's a big guy.
Yeah, but he was known for like producing those type of bands. So when he did the Hip, I think not Linus, but the Wherewithal and Fully Completely and those heavier songs, Locked in the Trunk of a Car, I kind of think that heavy sound he helped give to the band and help them adapt that sound. But just speaking of like production wise, I think this album is smooth like butter. I think it sounds great. It sounds great with headphones. Sounds great, through speakers. And that's the only reason why I didn't give you their next album, Day for Night. I think that album, you would enjoy the songwriting better. It's a little bit more experimental. It's also heavier and a little bit more grungy sounding, but I do not like the production on it. I do not. It sounds like, at times it sounds like demo tapes. Like, I don't know. Something about it does not, that one I would love for you to listen just to let me know how you think the production is. But I'm curious if you like this production, because I think this is one of their best produced albums.
I do really like the production. I agree with you. I think there are some tracks that the production really takes the song to a next level. Fully Completely, definitely. I think the production's great and fits the song. Like I mentioned earlier, it reminds me of what little I know of The Cure. It reminds me of some of their stuff.
Which is weird, because I only know a couple big Cure songs, and the only one I know from them that is kind of heavier is A Forest. And I only know it from the Toadies cover of it, which is a fantastic cover. But I'm shocked that out of all the songs on here, that's the one that you think sounds most like The Cure. I'll definitely have to give The Cure more of a listen, because if they sound like a little bit like Fully Completely, then I'm all about that.
Well, okay. Let's take this back a step real quick. I have a friend, Steven, and his favorite band's The Cure. So he's been educating me and filling me in. So I definitely took a dive some of, not their newer albums, but kind of some of their older-ish ones. But they have a lot of material, actually. That could be a long discussion right there. But regarding the production on this album, that makes sense now that you mentioned the whole Christy. You'll call him Christy, I'll call him Christy. Him producing heavier artists, because I think some of those guitar tones are pretty meaty, honestly. Like, they just have like that fat mid-range on the guitars. You made a great point that the album sounds great on headphones, speakers, off your phone. Oh yeah, all the songs definitely have the same. They sound like they're all from the same album.
That's a good thing.
Well, yeah, some songs, like some production can vary more. These felt very similar in production to me. And I wasn't sure at first if I liked how specific the album sounds in terms of production, if that makes sense. But I actually do really like it. Um, yeah. I want my
Yeah.
album to smell like that.
I just wanted to wrap up my talk on Pigeon Camera because I do want to give it just a little bit more spotlight. Because it was one of the ones that you didn't love on first listen, but it's grown on you. Um, this
Yes.
is also one of those songs where if you listen to the lyrics, you might have no idea what he's talking about. And it's about two things. One, it's about actually pigeons that, again, I think it's World War II or World War one of those wars. They would actually put cameras on pigeons. And obviously, the technology back then was not as advanced as what we are today, but they would put pigeons on cameras and have them try to like spy on the enemy.
Oh.
Um, and that's something else that he learned in that same museum when he was learning about the 50 mission cap. So it's another historical thing he took. But lyrically, if you listen to the lyrics, the song is about a guy wanting a relationship with his sister,
Oh God.
which is very awkward to talk about. But it is. I mean, that is when you listen to the lyrics and he's talking in the chorus, he's singing it. It's embarrassing. I don't want this. And there's lyrics where he's like, over there, that's my sister's room. Like that is what the lyrics are about.
That was my favorite part when he keeps like my sister.
Yeah, because you thought it was just like random, right? Like,
Right. His
and
house
it's
has its
like it's
politics.
obviously it's not autobiographical or anything, but it is such a weird thing to sing about, and then not only that, but to make it also about real life pigeons with cameras on them. But that's what something I love about Gore is just like you listen to the lyrics and you can make them about your own personal life, but then when you actually go to dissect the lyrics, they're like, oh, it's about two completely different things that, and I do think they have something to do with one another. I think you could actually make a case for like, you know, the pigeon camera being like a symbol about this like weird, embarrassing, desire or whatever. But it's just, he really makes you think with his lyrics, and all of these songs like Lionize, I know you mentioned that opening line. That's very also weird, but that song, from my interpretation, has to do with like celebrity and fame.
Yeah, that would definitely make sense.
Will Go To is kind of like, to me, again, it's not anything specific, but it sounds like someone like, it's almost kind of like a statement, like if we're, like someone going into war and like, you're kind of a leader and the others are following you and, Will Go To, it has that kind of energy to it. But like all these songs, they're like, there's something specific about them. Like this is the thing I love about the lyrics on this album. There's no like complete straight up love song. And there's some songs on their other albums where it is more straightforward. It's about this, it's about that. But I don't know, they just don't have any songs lyrically where it's like straight cut. They're always like different elements to it. Like it's like Shrek said, it's like an onion where there's layers and stuff. Like it's true for this band. So
I definitely did like, or I do like on this album as a listening and trying to focus on lyrics because I know that's something that you really value off your first listens. And basically what you're saying, I like how most of the songs have a very specific, like word or imagery to it that isn't necessarily the focus of the song, but it kind of allows you to, it kind of gives the song its own identity. So like Pigeon Camera, even though that song's really not about pigeon cameras, like it's so specific, it's memorable. Even Lionize, where it's not, really about lions, but like that word is specific enough, and I think it's powerful enough within the song's context that it's memorable. At least that's how I kind of felt about the lyrics, and it kind of is inspiring to myself. Like, oh, I want to do more of that stuff.
I agree.
And
To-
some of the stuff that I didn't even know I thought was cool, like 50 mission cap. Like I just love the way he says that in the hook. It's kind of comical to me in a great way.
so I'm curious. We want to come close here to wrapping this up, but I am curious what are your three favorites right now? You don't have to give them in a particular order, but like if you had to pick your three favorites, what are your three favorites?
Three favorites. Okay, so just kind of off top of my head, I am looking at the songs here. I would say "Fully Completely" is my favorite, and if I had to say two more, I'd probably go with Pigeon Camera. Although I have some qualms about that now. Thanks a lot. And this is hard. I don't know. I really do like Lionized. I know it's kind of like, it's a little more of a low calorie song here, but I think it's really catchy, and it did get me kind of to feel out the album, which I can appreciate.
And overall, how would I guess just to kind of sum up, like, does this make you more interested in hearing the rest of the band's discography? Like, are you, like now that, in the following weeks, we're going to pick other albums and we're going to have other episodes with other musical discussions. Is this an album you see yourself going back to listen to again? Do you want to get into their other albums? Like, you think you're going to be asking me for more suggestions, or is this kind of like I liked it for what it was. It's cool, but it's not something that I'm going to listen to a lot or further explore.
So first off, yeah, I will definitely be listening to this album more. I would say I love the album. I really do enjoy it, and as I listen to it, like I said, the songs I'm just liking them more and more. And I'm thinking about, yeah, if I will pursue them more after this. So one of my favorite songs of them is a Head by Century, which that's just one of their songs I knew.
Which is surprising because it's not surprising in the sense that it was one of their biggest singles in Canada, but it's also one of their more like kind of radio friendly, poppier songs. So I'm surprised that's one of your favorites.
Um, yeah, I guess maybe you could view it like that. I don't know. There's something about it that I think just kind of there's something about it that I can't quite verbalize, but there's something that really draws me into it. But I'd be interested in listening to the Hip from this album forward to see kind of that transition. And I will admit I'm not as drawn to listen to the two previous albums.
Yes.
Because you said they're more blues rock based, and not that I have a problem with blues rock, and I get it. There's tons of blues rock bands that are great and that I do like, but when for this album, it wasn't the kind of the blues rock classic rock thing that made the album special to me. It was what they did on top of it, and I think with the more classic rock sound, that's something that I enjoy more over blues. So for me, it was a win. But I worry that maybe taking a step back would kind of be like a downgrade for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny enough because, like I said, even from the first album, people in Canada were just in love with them. And it's fun. Like some people will say that their first three albums are their best. And some people even say their first album, the one that surprisingly is my least favorite, the very first album, Up to Here, some people are like that's their best. And some people, like they went downhill after that, which I think is insane because I think they only got better. Some people did not like their like last couple of albums they released, in the late, 2010s. But I would like if I was to recommend something to you, I would probably say go forward, listen to the next album, Day for Night. Heavier sound, a little dirtier, a little dark, definitely darker lyrically and musically. And then after that,
Darker than Dating Your Sister and Keeping Bodies in Your Trunk.
Yeah, because there's a whole song about ship hitting an iceberg. There's basically a song about the Titanic.
Oh, okay.
And there's songs about death, and there's songs about like shootings and prostitution. So yeah, there's just as much dark stuff, but it has a little bit of a heavier sound. So if you like the kind of the heavierness stuff from them, you'll like it. And then the next album, Trouble at the Hen House, that's the one that has the Head by Century, and that album is like that's like the most normal song on the album, because the rest of the songs on the album definitely have more experimental sounds. Like there's a lot of weird sounds, and there's a lot of weird songs on it that are kind of on first listen. You're like, whoa, like this song is just weird. And it's almost off-putting, but then the more you listen to it, the more you're kind of like, this actually works. At least for me. Maybe for you, it'll be too much in one direction, or maybe you'll completely love it on first listen. It's hard to say. And then I think after that, they start going a little bit more artsier, but in a good way. You get Phantom Power, which is my favorite, and we'll get to that album one of these days, whether it's on the podcast or off the podcast. But that one to me is just kind of like Yield for Pearl Jam, where it's like the perfect combination of all their sounds. But
Right.
yeah, I would definitely recommend probably going forward, do the next album, Day for Night, and then do Trouble at the Hen House, do Phantom Power. And then if you ever hit an album where you're like, okay, now they're maybe going too pop or to this direction, then you could go back and listen to the first two to remind you that they came from a rootsier sound, bluesier sound. And really quick, I will want to mention, if you go listen on Spotify to the 2014 reissue, there's two bonus songs, one called Radio Show and one called So Hard Done By. Now, Radio Show was just a song that they wrote that didn't make it. It's an okay song. I like it. I definitely would not have put it on the album. I don't think I'd replace it with any song on the album. But So Hard Done By, they recorded this version that's like not even 3 minutes, and they didn't put it on the album. But then for the next album, Day for Night, they recorded a much slower, totally, completely different sounding version of it with the same lyrics, just a completely different vibe. So I'd be very curious for you to listen to the version on Day for Night that is considered the real album version, and then for you to go back and listen to the fully, completely version where it's completely different tempo and completely different mood.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
And then while you're on Spotify checking out the 2014 reissue, they have a complete live concert that includes every song off of Fully Completely, and then also one song off their second album, the song called Twist My Arm. It's a great sounding live album. It was included with the vinyl reissue that they put out this month. I listened to it on vinyl for the first time last week. Sounded great, but it's a show I've heard on Spotify before then. And it was like a special show, so there's not a ton of in between song banter. So go into it expecting not to hear the crazy Gordisms that he would later be known for, but there's still some pleasant banter in between songs, and it's a great live sounding show. The band is on fire, and it's a great version to really hear all these songs in a live setting, because they do the whole album. They don't do it in order, but they do it kind of in the style like of their normal concert. Like they open with a song they'd open a lot of the shows with, and they close it with one of the songs they'd always close with. So I recommend,
that's still preserved.
Yeah, so I definitely recommend checking out that album. But I'm glad to hear you like the album. Any closing thoughts?
Yes, one closing thought, which I wish we would have done this before we actually talked about the album. How do we feel about the album name and the album artwork? I personally think it's a great album name, and I think that the title track definitely deserves having the title track name. Now the artwork I haven't really looked into too much, mostly because when I'm looking at my phone, I'm not looking at whatever the hell I'm seeing. I'm just seeing like colors. But I don't know. I guess I'm not super fond of the album cover. I don't find it offensive, but
Well,
how do you feel?
I love the album title, because again, I think that's the strongest song on the album. I just love the phrase Fully Completely. The artwork, it was designed by a Dutch artist that Gore just happened to like stumble upon her artwork and just really enjoyed it. So, they asked her to create the artwork for the album, and her, with the help of the guitarist Rob, kind of came up with the idea. And what they did was they like photocopied their own faces, the band's faces, which you'll find in the album, the booklet artwork, and like the family members of the artists and stuff. Like they used the family photocop faces and kind of incorporated into this kind of specific artwork that like I know there's like Chinese symbols and numbers in there, and it's kind of one of those very ambitious like artworks where
Seems
it's
like
like,
it's trying to be a statement.
yeah, yeah, I don't know. I like it. I think it fits the album. It's definitely not. They have other album artwork. Other album artwork is very interesting. I'll say, like, there's only like 2 album artworks that are very kind of boring, and that's like the first one because it's just a picture of the band. But thinking back to all, and then the album "We Are the Same" is just like them in front of like a fire, like a bonfire. But other than that, all their album artworks are very interesting, and I don't know. I just because I've lived with it for so long, I think it fits. But yeah, it is. It's very
It definitely fits.
specific. Yeah, it's very kind of specific. But I think it's a cool art style, and I think the original painting or the original artwork hangs in their recording studio in Ontario.
Oh, that's cool.
But yeah, I'm glad you like the album. I hope to hear more from you when it comes to the Hip. Hopefully, you'll listen to their other albums and get into them.
And report back.
Report back. Next week, we are going to be tackling Tom Waits and his album Small Change. I'm very excited to talk about it because I've been listening to it for the last week, and I also have a lot of thoughts about it. I'm not going to spoil anything, though. You'll have to come back next week and listen to the next episode. But yeah, until then, give us your comments, your suggestions. Let us know how you feel about Fully Completely or the Hip in general, especially for any non-Canadian listeners. Did you know this band in the US when they were making it big in Canada? You've seen them live, tell us any of your stories. But yeah, until next week, this has been another episode of Relatively Sound, and you'll be hearing from us soon.